Hey class, how are we doing? Okay, lecture one, week one. We're going to be covering chapters 1 and 2 of the text, defining public relations and the history and the growth of public relations. So, to start out, public relations is different than communication. We will go a little further into communication as we get into the course, but public relations is relations with the public, right? I mean, that's the origins of the word. But public relations requires a reciprocal type of connection. So I know the text talks about public relations being a rather new field. It is, as far as the growth of industry, the growth of technology, the growth of business has created the necessity for public relations divisions within these institutions. So that has certainly grown. But the idea of public relations in general goes back thousands of years. Kings and queens and monarchies had public relations people. I know the author talks about even going back to the Catholic Church, going way back in the day, public relations people. It was a process of where an organization, an institution, a leader, whatever, influences the mass public. So it goes back pretty far, but the 20th century brought about more of a corporate need for it, and so that's some of the stuff that we'll be looking at as well. So what is public relations? A few things relatively new. We talked about that. It's increased because of the expansion of industry. And there's several definitions. One thing that I learned in studying communication is there's a myriad of definitions for this. It all depends on what you're looking at and the context of how we're studying it. The Public Relations Society says public relations is a strategic communication process that builds mutually beneficial relationships between organizations and their publics. Publics is something we're going to be talking about a lot. Publics, in the simplest form, you can look at publics as who you're accountable to, who you're working with. Those are the publics. Public relations is reaching out to a wider group in an effort to improve your standing, your organization's standing. So publics matter. Okay, and we'll go deeper into that, but publics matter. Publics are who you are communicating to, and sometimes with. Okay. The author says that public relations is a planned process to influence public opinion through sound character, proper performance, based on mutually satisfactory two-way communication. So again, it's a connection. It's two-way. Okay, you're communicating out, and then you're getting a response, which tells you whether your communication is effective. And then from there, you determine whether or not you tweak your communication, or if you keep it as is. Another important thing that Seitel points is he calls it a planned process. And that's very important. It's planned. Okay, some communication isn't, but public relations is. You'll hear terms as we study of rollouts. We're going to roll out a communications plan. We're going to have specific structure to it. It's planned, and that's very different than some other types of communication where it just occurs. Public relations is planned. It's methodical, and it's thought out. Okay. One thing about it I noticed in reading the text, Seitel goes out of his way several times to talk about how ethics and honesty is paramount within the field. That is true, but I would not say that it's common. Nor is it uncommon, but I think that what he talks about, I would suggest, is more what public relations strives to be. As you go further into the text, I believe it's in chapter 4, chapter 5, the percentages in the polling of public relations folks and how they say whether they've lied or distorted the truth, those numbers are pretty high. So I would argue that this is what Seitel hopes the field becomes, not necessarily what it is. Some challenges within public relations now that did not exist back in the 90s, 80s, 70s, going back, obviously is the rise of social media. We will be banging this like a drum throughout this course. It's unavoidable. Social media has completely changed the landscape of everything that we are dealing with. And it has caused public relations to have to, the field to rethink how it's going to operate during this. The challenge is to cut through the clutter, right? Years ago, I taught a class on strategic communication, and I was talking about the 24-hour news cycle. So the 24-hour news cycle nowadays isn't even the biggest challenge. The biggest challenge is constant pounding of social media and fake news, right? Just things that aren't true that's out there. But when I taught this class, it was in 2006, and I had a variety of students in the class, and all different types of ages. And so I would ask each student as we went through, I said, tell me where you were when the space shuttle exploded. That's all I would say, the space shuttle. And it was very interesting, because almost every student said to me, well, I was in 8th grade, and I'll never forget it when it happened. And I would look at this person and I would say, okay, you're an adult now. So, okay, you're in 8th grade back then. Okay, that's interesting. Then I would ask other people, and they would all give me answers that suggested that it was a while ago. And then I finally got to a student, and the student said, well, which one? I said, yes, exactly, which one? There were 2 shuttle explosions. But interestingly enough, almost every student was referring to the explosion in 1986. Some of these students weren't even born, but they knew of the Challenger explosion. Interestingly enough, 3 years before that class, in 2003, we also lost a shuttle. No one even thought about that. No one even talked about that shuttle. Everyone assumed I was talking about the Challenger explosion in 86. And then when I told the class that, and I said, well, why are you all thinking about a shuttle that exploded 20-some years ago, or almost 20 years ago at that time, when we lost a shuttle 3 years ago? And they were like, oh my goodness, I forgot about that. It's not that they were heartless people, but it was because there's not a lot of staying power in news anymore. Back in 1986, when we lost that shuttle, that was in the news for a year. In 2003, when we lost the shuttle, it had to compete with so many other things that it kind of got lost. So that is something that we dealt with back in 05, 06, whenever I did this class. Fast forward now, 2021, it's even worse. There is no staying power anymore. Things just don't stick around with us. Just think of these last 3 or 4 weeks. Leading up to Christmas, all the talk on the news was about, whether Congress was going to get a COVID package together, and whether stimulus checks were going to be gone, were going to be going out. That within 10 days, that just disappeared, and now everyone's talking about riots at the Capitol. Back in November, everyone was obsessed with the election. Things move quick. The media directs us as to what we're going to see and hear, and now with public relations, this is even more of a challenge, because how do we get that message out so people remember it? Okay, big challenge. So Seitel goes over Marston's race approach. Okay, and so this is a good way to look at how, when you're going to put together a communications plan, how to do this. Okay, so Marston says we start out with research, we go to action, then we go to the communication, and then we go to evaluation. So let's break that down, okay? Research. We need to know what we're talking about. We need to know what we're dealing with, okay? 1, because we need to know the truth. 2, we need this research and information to effectively come up with our plan. If you're uninformed, you lose credibility. You lose credibility for your client, you lose credibility to the media, you lose credibility to the public. Okay, so we have to be informed. Then once we are informed, then we go to the communication segment. This is the implementation phase, okay, where you bring in your tactics, you bring in your communication techniques. Then and I told myself in this class, I'm not going to stop videos and rewind. So I'm not going to rewind. I left out action. research, then we go to action. Once informed, you design your plan. Okay. Then we go to communication. This is where we implement. And then we go to evaluation. Okay. Look at the progress to determine if it's working. Evaluation is very, very important. All right. Anything you do is communication, whether you're a public relations firm, whether you're a press secretary, whether you are on your school board, or whether you are a company with your own public relations field. You have to evaluate. Because if you do not evaluate, you do not know if your efforts are working. If you don't know if your efforts are working, you're losing a lot of money and a lot of time. Okay? So it's a circle. Research, action, communication, evaluation. It's very simplistic, right? And I mean, I think a lot of you are probably all saying, well, yeah, that makes sense. But those are the fundamentals that you want to do when you're pulling this together. And you'd be surprised. You'd be surprised how many, even professionals, will roll out communication plans that are missing one of these, or they have them backwards, right? They'll evaluate after they do their research. No, you evaluate once you pull through, okay? Public relations within corporations. Most organizations have public relations within organizations. I know Sattel talks about this. He goes into depth about a lot of this. Whether it's a congressional office, a company, the White House, a church, it doesn't matter. Your public relations folks, your press folks, your communications folks have to have access to the decision makers. If they don't, there's going to be a disconnect. I've seen it happen 1,000 times. Okay, look at presidential administrations. How many times have we seen in presidential administrations where the press secretary will say something that's not true? Then the press secretary, having a loyalty to the president, but at the same time trying to keep credibility among the press corps, has to walk that line of saying, well, that was my error, but at the same time saying, but no, I'm not out of the loop, because if I'm out of the loop, that means everything I've been telling you for the past year may not be accurate, right? Bill Clinton's press secretaries had to deal with this all the time, especially during the Monica Lewinsky scandals. They were purposely left out of the loop, but yet they lost all credibility with the media. President Trump's comms folks have had that issue as well. I would say that President Bush and President Obama's comms officials, not as much, because those administrations worked more closely with their communications people, and they also did not have the ethics troubles that the Clinton and the Trump administrations had. So you will find that that's very important. And as you go into the field, if you do go into the field, you have to make sure that you are kept in the loop on these things. Because when you go on the record and you discuss things and you are not 100% accurate, it's very difficult to get credibility back. Okay. Publics. So again, publics are our audience, right? But it's not just people, okay? It's not just people reading the newspaper. Publics can, depending on what you are, if you're working in public relations for a company, let's say you're working in public relations for Coca-Cola, for instance. Your publics can be internal as well as external, right? Your internal is your stockholders. Internal is employees. Internal is other individuals that are impacted by the company. External publics can be environmental groups that you are trying to keep at bay from boycotting Coca-Cola because they feel like you're not doing enough in a recycling effort. Your publics can be Congress, because you want to show Congress that you're a good global citizen and you're doing things to help inner city youth, or you're doing things to help education efforts so they can continue to make sure that your corporate tax credits are protected within the budget. There are a lot of different groups that you are communicating with, and those are all of your publics. We'll get deeper into publics as we go into the course, but just as a general sense, publics don't just mean the public. Publics is a word that is used for other groups that have a stake in what you're doing. Okay? Publics are created when a group One, faces a similar situation. Two, recognizes what is problematic about a situation. And three, organizes to do something about it. That's what a public is. Okay, like I would said, an environmental group, for instance. That could be what a public is. So that's kind of a loose definition of what they might be, but again, they influence, and they're important. Page 11 of the book, Seitel has a good listing of some publics for you. Okay. Let's see what else we have here. So societal trends that have led to the growth of public relations. There's some interesting things here, and how things change. The growth of big institutions. Government has grown. Industry has grown. Everything's grown. And so it's left open room for public relations. Public awareness. People now, with the growth of social media, have become more interested in things. Whether it's the ALS challenge of watch as I dump a bucket of water on my head and post a video and give money to a cause, all the way to GoFundMe efforts online. Public awareness has risen to things, and so has media sophistication. So that has also created room for public relations. Societal changes as well. Identity politics, right? We seem to be consumed now by identity. I find it ironic that so many politicians call for unity, while at the same time they spend so much time dividing us into groups, right? We're divided by our gender, we're divided by our race, we're divided by our marital status, we're divided by where we live, we're divided by our demographics, we're divided by you name it. And this identity politics, not only is it damaging, but it's created all kinds of different groups that advocate for different things that now have opened the room for more public relations. And of course, again, the dominance of the internet and social media. That has played just a tremendous role in the rise of and the need for public relations. So, interesting on that. So, how do we apply this? Like I had said, I was the director of communications for the USDA, the Department of Agriculture, under the Bush administration. USDA does ag and trade policy, and pretty much has their hands in everything. I was at the job about 2 weeks when we ran into an issue. I had a staff of about 100 folks. It was a giant communications staff all throughout the country. And one of the things the USDA handles is the food supply. So I got a call. It was a Saturday morning. And I got a call that Fox News was about to run with a story that there was mad cow disease in the school lunch supply out in California. Now, my background wasn't necessarily in food and ag policy, so I was like, I don't know really what this means. But I went into work and I met with one of our press secretaries, and he said, "This is bad." What happened was there are strict regulations as to livestock and how livestock can go can be processed in slaughterhouses. And I know it sounds like kind of a weird arcane topic, but it actually is a pretty big deal. And there was one was called a downer cattle that got into the one of the processors, and a human animal rights group had video of this occurring, and they released it to the press. So what it led to is it led to the biggest food recall in American history, and this fell under the administration. So first thing we had to do was we had to convince the American public that the food supply was safe. Secondly, we had to restore credibility in this process. So I got my board together, my directors together, and they started giving me briefings one by one. And I said, y'all, I need to cut you off there. I'm still new. I don't even know all of your names yet. And each minute that we talk about this, we're falling further behind the media reporting on this. And my first question to all of them was, what do we know? Not what do we think, not what do we hope, what do we know? What do we know? Do we know for certain that the food supply is safe? A couple of the directors came forward, and there were a couple of the scientists there as well, and they said, we do. We do. I said, okay, how do we know this? They provided the information. The reason I was so adamant about this was because if we came out of the gate and talked to the media about something that we were pretty sure about, or something that we had hoped about, and it turned out we were wrong, it would be even worse, and we would have lost all credibility. So we started quickly coming out with what we knew, and then we filled the gaps as we knew it. So sometimes that meant that we would have to tell the media, we don't know yet. So in the meantime, this animal rights group is continuing to pound us, but we had to be patient and not come out too quickly because we could cause more of a trouble. Even more sensitive is the fact that the White House was just coming off of the heels of Katrina, the hurricane, and we had to be very, very careful as to how we did this. To make a long story short, well, it's been a long story anyways, but we were able to, over about a month, turn the narrative around. The food supply was safe. But then we were able to explain what happened. And we came out with a detailed account of what happened. We were honest. That doesn't mean that we had to share everything, but when asked, we were honest. We addressed it in a way that was responsible, and we kept the credibility of the media. One thing I did was I actually had select reporters that we took with us, with the Secretary of Agriculture, and we actually toured these facilities over the next month, and we embedded reporters with us so they understood that the food supply was safe. What we also did was we pointed out that this animal society, this animal rights group, who had this video, had the video for about a month before they released it. One of the reasons we knew this food supply was safe was because they held this video for a month. And if the food supply wasn't safe, we would have had people that would have gotten sick. So then we turned and said, when we found out this animal rights group had it for a month, then the question became, well, if you had this information for a month, how could you hold on to it knowing that people could die from this? They didn't have an answer to that. And suddenly that became the narrative in the media. And they lost credibility. So this animal rights group lost credibility. And actually, the leader of the group isn't even around anymore because it turned into a big legal issue with them. We were successful because we were honest, because we knew our facts. We rolled this out correctly. We were patient, but we were aggressive, but we were patient, and it worked for us. We kept credibility while at the same time being able to discredit this group. So that's just a little application as to how this was done. We did a SWOT analysis, which we'll learn about a little bit more on how to roll this out. But I will tell you that in the midst of everything, and when you're getting hammered in the news, and the White House is calling saying, "What is going on?" Cooler heads prevailed, and we methodically and thoroughly rolled out the response. If we would not have done this, it would have been a disaster. So I can talk about it now. Back then, I was, having a nervous breakdown. But anyways, so that is this for this week. Let me know if you have any questions. Please, if you have not read the materials, please do read it. And any questions on the discussion board, let me know. But again, it's public relations is growing, and it's part of a media ecology that continues to be something that is becoming a wider field. So for those of you who are studying it, there are certainly opportunities. All right, have a good week, y'all.